Hi, I'm Dr. George Yancey. Let's share some paradigms. And the paradigm I want to share today concerns the Southern Baptists. Now, you may be wondering why I want to talk about the Southern Baptists. Why not something more broader? Part of it's personal. So I want to go a little bit into my personal story before I talk about the Southern Baptists, because what I want to talk about is, are they going to grow? Or is this decline we've seen going to maintain itself for a period of time? So I want to talk about the future of the Southern Baptists, the way I see it as a sociologist, but also as someone who has some vested interest in it. So when I was saved at 19, and I was saved kind of, maybe one of these videos I'll give my testimony. I was saved kind of, came to Christ, I don't say completely on my own, with no influence from anything else, but there was no ministry that led me to Christ. But soon after my salvation, I was discipled by the Southern Baptists. I was discipled by a college ministry, Southern Baptists. And so my initial growth, I attribute to the Southern Baptists. And for that, I'm very grateful. For reasons I'm going to go into, I left the Southern Baptists about 5 or 6 years later, came back to them almost by accident because my current church was a Southern Baptist church. I didn't think it was Southern Baptist when I joined, but they happened to be. But once I was in that church, I caught quasi-active in the Southern Baptists again. I went to a couple of conventions. I've met some of the higher-ups in the Southern Baptists. There's some people there that I deeply respect. I'll even go say love and respect some people in the Southern Baptist world. My church has chosen to not affiliate with the Southern Baptists. We were not kicked out. I want to be clear about that. We were not kicked out. We chose on our own to go a different path. And so I'm no longer a Southern Baptist officially. And for reasons I won't go into today, I don't think I would willingly join the Southern Baptist Church today. I don't think I would want to be part of that denomination today, even though there are people in there that I respect, love, even though the Southern Baptists, they discipled me. They're a part of my spiritual history, a part that I'm very grateful for. So I'm grateful for the Southern Baptists. But I don't think I would join today. And part of it is because of what I'm going to talk about. Now, if it's just about me, that's one thing. But I think this is going to denote a larger issue the Southern Baptists have to think about. So, in order to discuss the Southern Baptists and what's happened to them, we got to go back in the past to the famous conservative resurgence that began around 1979, I believe, where the conservative elements in the Southern Baptist Convention decided to retake the denomination. And the way they did that was they would stack the convention so that when the president would get to appoint all the commission leaders and all, the bureaucrats, if you will. I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But over time, because the president can't appoint them all at once, over time, if you win enough times, then you can basically, your side can control the Southern Baptists. It took about 10 years from what I gathered, but eventually the conservatives had all the control. The issues that were really big, one of the big issues was the issue of inerrancy. Was the Bible inerrant? And so there was more progressive elements of the Southern Baptists that perhaps were not as faithful to that view as others. I don't know all the dynamics. It was kind of funny. It was a few years after the beginning of this takeover, that I became a Christian and that I was discipled by the Southern Baptists. So I faintly heard about this argument, but at that time I was just trying to learn how to grow. So there was that, and there was also the question of women in leadership. My impression was that the inerrancy question was the bigger question. When I say women in leadership, I want to be fair, is women pastors. It wasn't that you couldn't have a woman in no leadership whatsoever, but women pastors. So the conservatives took over. Southern Baptists were growing before they took over, and they kept growing. Why were they growing? There's never any one reason. But research has shown that at that time, even to today, a lot of the mainline, more progressive denominations were suffering. And a major argument was that they did not differentiate themselves from the more secular society. Conservative denominations did. So was it possible that the conservative takeover helped the Southern Baptists to grow? It is possible. I'm not saying for sure that it happened that way. They're growing anyways. Perhaps it stopped them from declining. Perhaps, it made them grow faster. But they were growing anyways, okay? So the takeover happened and the Southern Baptists grew. There are some offshoots that developed. They're more progressive, more moderate, if you will. Southern Baptists, though, were enjoying that growth. This began to decline, though, several years ago. Several years ago, we began to see a decline in the growth of Southern Baptists. One thing that's happening in the larger society was the growth of what's called the nuns. And the nuns are people who answer the religion question, none of the above. In other words, they're not very religious in a traditional sense. They may be spiritual, but they're not wanting to go to a church. So there is that. And I would also say that there's the growth of non-denominational but evangelical churches. They did not affiliate with the denomination. It's a very interesting question how this emerged. And maybe I'll make a video about the importance of non-denominational evangelical churches. But now if you're an evangelical, while there are other evangelical denominations, I'm not saying that the Southern Baptist was the only evangelical denomination. Now if you're an evangelical, though, you have all these non-denominational congregations you could go to. And many of them were growing to be quite large. So the Southern Baptists had competitors for a pie that was at the very least not growing as fast as the rest of the nation. And that pie was evangelical believers. So the Southern Baptists have been in decline, and some of them have been talking about how can they reverse this decline and how they can emerge. Now, a couple more pieces to the puzzle. Lately, even though their numbers have declined, their membership has declined, the number of baptisms has actually increased a little bit. So this is a paradox. And some may be saying what's happening is that the marginal members of the Southern Baptists are falling away. I don't think it's just that they're cleaning their rolls, cleaning out the people who haven't been attending, and that's why you have the decline. However, some of the marginal members may have been falling away, not renewing their membership, if you will. So what is happening? Well, over the past few years, I've gained more insight as to the future of the Southern Baptists. If you're a Southern Baptist, you probably know about the controversy over women pastors. Southern Baptists have always been what's been called complementarian, which means that they believe the sex roles complement each other. They do not believe women should be allowed to be pastors. They may be in other leadership roles, but not the pastor role. There's also egalitarians, those who believe women who can be pastors, not have to be pastors, but they can be pastors. There's probably always been a few egalitarian congregations within the Southern Baptists. And really, up until recently, there was more of a live and let live approach. Complementarianism was preached. It was emphasized. There's no doubt about it. When I went to the conventions, complementarianism was clearly enunciated. Now, a few years ago, at the conventions, there was this big fight over critical race theory. And those who were more, let's say, fundamentalists kind of lost that fight. The fight was over a notion of critical race theory being taught in seminaries, which I will say it was not, but that's a topic for another video if I decide to do that. And they lost. And then they glommed on to the issue of women as pastors. Now, there was no real debate on where the Southern Baptists stood. But the existence of any churches that possibly had a woman as a pastor, not even if she wasn't head pastor, that became a target for these fundamentalists. It was a target that was more amenable to them than the fight they had over racial issues. Over racial issues, a lot of the people who are very conservative theologically also were very concerned about racial issues. But on women pastors, they tend to agree. And so I want to be very clear. The argument was never about should we endorse women pastors. The argument was, can we allow a church that has what we define as a woman pastor to remain within us? And the answer increasingly is no. Now, why is this important? I mean, is this really an issue of salvation or anything like this? Why is all this important, especially to their growth? I think this is denoting the Southern Baptists transitioning from a more evangelical denomination to a fundamentalist denomination. And the difference is evangelicals engage society. Evangelicals don't have these sort of walls to protect themselves. They engage society politically sometimes, socially. Fundamentalists tend to create these strict boundaries. Either you're in or you're out. If you're out, you're all the way out. That's a generalized difference. The Southern Baptists are becoming more fundamentalists. Fundamentalists do not tend to grow. Research shows evangelicals tend to grow because they're engaged in society. Fundamentalists tend to have people in them that are very strongly, passionately supportive, but they don't do as good of a job of reaching out and engaging society. I think the future of the Southern Baptists is they're a denomination that's not going to keep shrinking. They'll reach a point smaller than they are today, reach a point and not shrinking anymore, but neither will they grow. A lot of evangelicals who are not comfortable with that sort of fundamentalism will seek out non-denominational evangelicals or evangelicals that are not as fundamentalists. I think of Assembly of God as an example of this. Salvation Army is another great example. They'll seek out those sort of denominations and avoid the Southern Baptists. Now, that may be fine. There are people who say smaller but pure is what we want. And that's a decision to make. But that's a decision that I think the Southern Baptists should make deliberately. As one who's been a Southern Baptist and still cares about people who've been in that denomination, I hope that they think carefully about the decision they're going to make. Does this share some paradigms for you? Paradigms about the Southern Baptists and growth and about evangelicalism and fundamentalism. And maybe I'll do a more fuller video on the differences at another time. I didn't want to go too much into that in this short video. But does this share paradigms for you? If so, I hope it helped you to think more and more about what's happening in Southern Baptists and what may be happening in your denomination. Well, if you enjoyed this topic, if you enjoyed the subject matter, if you enjoyed this sort of conversation, I hope you'll like it. I hope you'll comment. If you did enjoy it, comment anyways. Let's have a discussion. I hope you subscribe. I hope you'll consider doing that for a small content creator like myself. That's gold. And if you enjoy this, come back so we can shatter some more paradigms.